Hey girls, welcome back. Today we are working on solving proportions, which are related to linear equations because they are basically a linear equation, but it's a fraction on both sides. So a proportion is an equation that has, like I said, two ratios that are equal. Another word for ratios are fractions. As you can see, from the first vocab word, a ratio is a comparison of two numbers by division. So another way to compare two numbers by division is to use a fraction. Some other ways ratios might be written are horizontally. For example, if you are looking at a student-to-teacher ratio, which you've probably heard of before, like when you were searching for what school did you want to go to, and they were telling you information about their school, they probably told you the student-to-teacher ratio. So if it said something like 15:1, that would mean that there are 15 students for every one teacher. It compares those two numbers together. However, you might see ratios with a variable like x to 4. So then you would have to solve and figure out what the missing number is. You can use proportions to do that. First, we're going to look at equivalent proportions, deciding whether two ratios are proportional or not. So let's take a look at these two. Are 2/3 and 16/24 proportional ratios? There's a few different ways you can figure this out. Method 1 is to see if they are both multiplied by the same number on the top and the bottom. So if we're looking at 2/3 and 16/24, I notice that 2 would have to be multiplied by 8 to get 16, and 3 would also have to be multiplied by 8 to get 24. So since they're multiplied by the same number on the top and the bottom, that tells me that they are proportional ratios. Make sure you pause the video and write these down. Another method that you could use is to reduce both the fractions. For example, 2/3, it actually doesn't reduce at all, it just stays to 2/3. But 16/24, that fraction can reduce because the top and the bottom, the numerator and the denominator, they both share a common factor of 8. If you're looking at dividing both of those numbers by 8, 16 divided by 8, we know that it's 8 times 2, whereas on the denominator, 24 divided by 8, 24 has to be 8 times 3. So if I cancel out my common factor of 8 on the top and the bottom, that leaves me with 2/3. Since both of these fractions reduce to the same fraction, 2/3, it means that they are proportional ratios. Now, the third method that you could use is to look at the cross products. Method 3 is where you cross multiply. So for example, if you're looking to get rid of the 3 on the denominator on the left, if you're dividing by 3, the inverse of that would be multiply by 3. So you can see in blue where I multiplied by 3. And that means if I do that on one side of the equal sign, I would also have to do that on the other side of the equal sign. When I multiply by 3 on the other side of the equal sign, it turns out I've just multiplied across 3 times 16. It turns out that way on the other side too. If I'm multiplying by 24 to get rid of the divided by 24, then I have to do the same thing on the other side of the equal sign. So I'm looking at 24 multiplied by 2, and it turns out I just had to multiply the cross product. So instead of multiplying both sides by 24 and writing it out as canceling out with the denominator, you could just look at, okay, across here, I have 2 and I have 24, so I would multiply those together. 2 times 24 makes 48. Then across the other way, 3 times 16 also makes 48. Since the cross products, remember product means multiply, the cross products are equal. They're both equal to 48. That means that these are proportional ratios. So I've just shown you 3 different methods to figure out whether or not these are proportional ratios. I'd like you to pause the video and see if you can try to think about B a little bit on your own first. It might be a little trickier because it has decimals, but see if you can reason your way through that. And then when you're done, go ahead and press play again. I decided to use method 3 on this. I looked at the cross products. So I multiplied 1.5 by 0.5, and I got 0.75. Then I multiplied across the other way, 0.3 times 2.0, and I got 0.6. Since these cross products are not equal to each other, it tells me that these two ratios are not proportional. They're not equal ratios, so therefore they are not proportional. You didn't have to use all 3 methods. You can pick whatever method makes most sense to you. In this case, method 3 made most sense to me because it was hard to figure out what would I multiply 1.5 by to get 2. It's not something I know off the top of my head, so I went ahead and did cross products for this one. You can switch out between the methods, or you can just pick one and stick with it. Now let's look at solving a proportion. Here's an example. X over 10 equals 3 over 5. Method 1 is to find the cross products. So just like before, we could multiply straight across. X times 5 makes 5x. 10 times 3 makes 30. If I want to solve that equation, 5x equals 30, I see that 5 is multiplied by x, so I know I have to divide by x to undo that. Whatever I do on one side of the equal sign, I have to do the same thing on the other side of the equal sign. So I divide both sides by 5, and I get x equals 6. Another method is to find the scale factor. So this is similar to figuring out what do I multiply this by to get the other ratio. I know that I would have to multiply 5 by 2 to get 10 on the bottom. That means that I would also have to multiply the numerator by 2. Whatever you multiply on the bottom, you have to multiply by the same number on the top if you want to keep it equal. So by multiplying the numerator 3 by 2, I would get my answer 6. Now let's try one that's a little trickier. This one's a little trickier because it's not just an x, it has 2 terms. It has x and minus 2. When I multiply the cross product, the biggest thing that people mess up is that they forget they have to put the x minus 2 in parentheses. You have to multiply x minus 2 all by 7, meaning that you have to distribute the 7. On the other cross product, 14 would multiply by 2, and once you get it set up, hopefully you remember from earlier this chapter how to solve that. I'll distribute my 7 to get 7x minus 14. Then I'll move the 14 over to the other side by adding it. Then I'll divide both sides by 7 to get my final answer, x equals 6. Make sure to write this note down to yourself. Remember to distribute, especially when you have 2 terms. That is the most common mistake that people forget. They forget to distribute the 7 to both terms. So don't make that mistake. Make a note to yourself so you make sure not to make that mistake. You will always remember to distribute. Make sure you're pausing the video as we go to take your time to write down the notes that you need to write down. And then press play again when you're ready. All right, I want you guys to try these 2 practice problems. Go ahead and try them on your own first without looking, and then look and see if you got them correct. A shortcut for practice problem A is once that you multiply 8 times 25, you can go ahead and divide by the other constant that's on the other cross multiplied. So, for example, when I see these 2 constants, 8 and 25, neither of those are variables, I know I'm going to cross multiply those 2. And then I look for what's my other constant. My other constant is 40. So I know I'm always going to divide by the 40 because I know here in this step, I'm going to end up dividing both sides by 40. So some people, you might hear them say cross multiply and divide. some people will go ahead and do that all in one step and get the final answer 5. Okay, let's look at one that's talking about rate of growth. It says, in the past 2 years, a retailer has opened 232 stores. If that rate remains constant, how many stores will open in the next 3 years? When you see something about a rate being constant, or it's always the same rate, or something like that, or they're always going the same speed, anything along those lines can be solved with a proportion. The thing you have to remember is to label what's going on top, what's going on the bottom. Because if you mix this up, then you're going to get it wrong. So I decided I'm going to put the years on top and the number of stores on the bottom. So my first one I know, in 2 years, they opened 232 stores. That's coming from sentence 1. But then in the question, it's saying how many stores will open in the next 3 years. So since the 3 is the years, I know that belongs on top. By labeling it, that's going to help you remember where to put each number. The number of stores is unknown, so I used X to represent the number of stores, and I put that on the bottom since the number of stores belongs on the bottom. After you get the proportion set up, you can cross multiply and divide to solve it and find your answer. For this one, if you were to end up with a decimal answer, you would know that you need to round that, because if you're talking about how many stores will open, it has to be a whole number. You can't have a decimal here. So make sure when you're solving questions or answering questions that have to do with something like a application, a real world problem, you're paying attention to your rounding and make sure your answer makes sense. All right, go ahead and pause and try the next practice problem. It says, it takes 7 minutes for Isabella to walk around the gym track twice. At this rate, how many times can she walk around the track in half an hour? Don't get confused here, girls. You need to make sure that you're either choosing minutes or hours. I would probably go with minutes. 7 minutes is going to be hard to change to hours. However, half an hour is easy to change into minutes. Everybody should know how many minutes are in half an hour. Go ahead and see if you can set that one up now and solve it for the final answer. This one actually does end up with a decimal or a fraction answer, but that's okay. If you're walking around the track, you don't have to walk an entirely full lap. So since she cannot walk 9 full laps, we're not going to round that up to 9. She doesn't have to walk that whole last lap because she's not going to have time. If she's walking at this rate, she's only going to be able to walk 8 6/7 laps in a half an hour. So almost 9 full laps, but not quite. Okay, that's it for the notes for today. You can make sure that you pause and rewind whenever you need to. If you have anything that you need a little bit more clarification on, feel free to write down your questions so that we can get those answered the next time I see you. Have a great rest of your day, girls. See you soon. Bye.